Number one, the film My Father, My Son is going to be run once today at 1 o'clock in here. It's a 2-hour film. And then the second announcement I wanted to make, I think some of you have already viewed it. There's the silent witness display in the lobby of the Communication Arts Auditorium depicting the Holocaust. And it's been presented by Temple Beth Sholem. And it'll be here till 4 this afternoon. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for this 4th day of the Convocations. Our guest speaker served as academic dean, dean of the faculty, dean of the college, dean of instruction at North Idaho College. And he also previously served as social science chairman at North Idaho College. He's also been a city councilman in Coeur d'Alene. He's also the mayor of Coeur d'Alene. He was the recipient, I think, of two major awards. One was the Raoul Wallenberg Civic Award that he accepted on the behalf of Coeur d'Alene. And another award he received was the Eisenhower Liberation Award. The significance of this, he was only the second, I think, enlisted man that was ever given this award, and it was quite an achievement for our speaker. Ray Stone is going to present this morning his experience liberating a concentration camp during the Second World War. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Ray Stone.
368,870 men's suits, 836,255 women's coats, 13,964 carpets, 7 tons of human hair, mountains of toothbrushes, eyeglasses, shoes, and artificial limbs, mass graves of hundreds of thousands of human beings. This was discovered at Auschwitz when the Russians liberated that camp in January 27th of 1945. This was verified by the Red Cross on that very same day. There were remaining in that camp at that time 6,000 inmates that were left to die. 58,000 had been marched just 2 weeks before to the west to avoid contact with the Russians. And that was Auschwitz in eastern Germany, or part of Poland at that particular time. There were 10 major eastern area extermination camps. There were 30-odd plus concentration camps, plus probably 300 to 400 sub-camps. Bergen-Belsen, Nachweiler, Dachau, Treblinka, Mauthausen, and the one that we're concerned about, or I'm concerned about this morning, the one at Ludwigslust, Germany, which was called Woblin concentration camp. And if you want to get involved with a little geography, that's east of Hamburg, and northeast of Hanover, and now is in eastern Germany. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Cohen, students, Dr. Bennett, citizens, it's good to be back on campus in this semi-teaching capacity at least. It's good in one way because this has forced me to relive once again a very short period in my life that I have had a tendency to ignore, and better still, not to let get in the way of my natural tendency, and sometimes people have a tough time believing this, to be optimistic about most things in life. You have been journeying down some very dark roads this week with subjects and topics that need to be addressed, and I admire and compliment your Convocation Committee for their willingness to deal with subject areas and with issues of substance that are somewhat negative. My subject today is no less dark, and I can guarantee that you will have a reaction to what I'm going to say, a response of some kind. And I will discuss this with you very carefully. And I promise also that you may have the opportunity to see the brightness of the human spirit, but certainly you're going to see the depth of darkness during this brief time that I'm going to spend with you. I'm going to ask only one thing of you. Now, I assume that you can hear me out here just as well with this microphone. I'm going to ask one thing of you this morning, and it's not a difficult thing to do, but allow yourself to focus on the things I'm saying with some intensity. Because as I proceed, and as I draw towards the ends, you're going to see something of me that I do not often let people see. Now, that of itself is of no importance. Absolutely none whatsoever. What is important is the cause for that transformation of my personality even this morning. I've placed on the rostrum up here a reading list, and I suggest you keep in mind that this, and it's welcome. You're welcome to take those lists. And I suggest that you keep in mind that the list is not the most ultimate, nor is it the best, nor is it necessarily the most scholarly. But I believe, in fact, these books, some or all, will help you understand and have a broader view of my particular subject today. There are also 3 books here, and one of them is my local, or my own original 82nd Division history, and has a picture of a person by the name of Lieutenant Lozier that was in the same platoon I was, although obviously I was a PFC and I did not have a great deal of contact with him. He was our regimental interrogation officer, and I was in the same Jeep that he was, and that picture will show some of the people that we were dealing with at that particular time. One of the books that I'm suggesting that you take a good look at is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by Shriver. It has been criticized by apologists of Nazi Germany as being too harsh, a regime that you remember that was destined to last 1,000 years and lasted just slightly over 12. I'm not going to allow myself that luxury. I'm not going to take the easy way out. I also want you to know that on that list there's a book listed by the name of Out of the Night, and Jan Valton is the author of that, and it has been criticized to a certain extent, but it does show the Nazi practices during the 20s and 30s and up to 1940, and it was the bestseller in 1941, and I think it has validity also. To get to the structure of what I want to talk with you about this morning, I want you to know that Valton's book, and I've done a lot of reading about Jan Valton, whose real name was Richard Krebs. He died in the South Pacific during World War II after he came back to the States as an infantry soldier. But I did some research on him. And as I said, he's not accepted by all authorities, but he does have a story there to tell. The title, Out of the Night, comes from the William Henley's Invictus, the poem, which was written in 1888. Invictus means unconquerable. And I want to read the first stanza of that poem for you, and then I hope go into the other part of this thing. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. Now, after these few introductory remarks, I must, by the very nature of my talk, provide you a setting, and I must speak to my personal background, and I also must speak, if I'm going to meet my obligation, something to and address the turbulent years from 1923 to 41. Then I will simply relate to you probably the most fearsome, depressing, traumatic experience of my life. Then and now, nothing on earth will ever be the same for me again. And if I stop right now, I can live and breathe the very stench of man's debasement and of the horror of men turned into animals. And I can cry once again, but not with tears, for long ago the tears dried up. The first point I must make at the beginning is that I make this without reservation. I happen to be in a certain place at a certain time, and in no way do I consider myself a hero. I was lucky to be a recipient of the Eisenhower Award, and there are lots of factors that are involved there. I was a frightened PFC in a parachute glider regiment attached to the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of the 325th Glider Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division. I was in the closing days of my 4th year in the Army, and in the closing days of my third campaign, I was a replacement, the lowest kind of GI that you could find in Europe at that time, and I had first seen the elephant in December during the Battle of the Bulge. I was classified by my MO as a scout, and when I was not walking, I was riding in the Jeep as a right-hand machine gunner in the right-hand front seat. And I had been AWL once in the States. So because I was a PFD didn't make me a dummy, but it didn't make me particularly smart. But I did learn one thing about that time. I learned to keep my mouth shut, my eyes open, and never volunteer for anything again. I also was more than this. I was married. I had, just before going overseas, I graduated from Craigmont High School in central Idaho, and I had attended Lewiston Normal for a couple of quarters, and right directly after Pearl Harbor, I volunteered for parachute infantry training and went through basic infantry and then transferred on to the parachute school and finished that in June of '42. I had one advantage, ladies and gentlemen. There was an outstanding advantage. I had a high school teacher who was absolutely a great teacher. His name was Mr. Howell, and he helped us as juniors and seniors in high school to understand at least some of the events that were going on in Europe. The Civil War in Spain, the ill treatment of some of the people in the conquered countries. This we learned about. But even as good as he was, the average student and the average American, now I know, generally in the nation itself, did not wish to accept the things that were going on in Europe. I do not recall anything but vague rumors, and at times some headlines about the terrible and terrifying experience and events that were taking place in those countries, in which Hitler and Germany conquered one country after another, sometimes without fighting until at least in September of 1939 with the attack on Poland in September of 1939. I do remember hearing Edward R. Murrow broadcast from London when I was a kid, and I remember hearing something about the Warsaw broadcast when Warsaw was surrounded by the Germans and was getting no help from the Allies. But like all juniors and seniors at that time, we were more interested in other things. I do not recall much feeling or see much information about Nazi Germany. The sad thing is that I'm not so sure really that it would have been very meaningful. I know now that as I know well today, that there are strategies taking place in America and Great Britain and other countries to discredit the stories of atrocities then beginning to take place in Germany. But I didn't know that until I came back to the States. And with that background, personal background, I then must proceed, of course, to help you understand, if I can, the world in which a nation of people would eliminate 6 million Jews and hundreds of thousands of others with deliberate foresight, to ask yourself what makes humans deal with other humans in an inhuman way. Now let me refresh your memory rather rapidly. Hitler first came to be noticed by the German press in 1923. The German Republic had reached a crisis. The money had become worthless. Most of all, the faith of the German people in the economic structure had failed, and the Nazi Party, though growing in numbers, was not really the most important political party in Germany at that time. However, in 21 and 23, there were a series of events that any politician of an evil nature would love to have happen. In April 1921, the Allies, victors in World War I, presented a bill of $33 billion of reparation to be paid by the Germans to the Allies. The German government claimed that they could not and would not pay. Now here's a picture of the starting point that I want you to really pay attention to. The Social Democrats, the Communists, the Middle Party, and the aristocratic Junkers all were vying for power. Unfortunately, the Republic, and it was a very democratic republic on their constitution was on paper, they yielded to pressures. And in Bavaria, a young firebrand grasped the idea and the strength of the nationalistic feeling and anti-democratic feeling and the anti-republican feeling, and the tide. He grasped that tide. And fearful that Germany would pay, slogans became rampant. The objective became to overthrow the Weimar Republic, the tearing up of the Treaty of Versailles. And in the fall of 23, the German Republic and the state of Bavaria reached a crisis. Gustav Riesemann, who was the Chancellor of Germany at that time, said passive resistance would only take place in the Ruhr, and they were going to resume the payments. Bavaria was in no mood for such a solution. Hitler and his early faithful followers, the SA, the Brown Shirts, the group that held their meetings together and protected them from outside influence and from outside trouble, the thugs are the words, they resisted. Hitler, along with others, was put on trial in Munich, and most of the rebel leaders were rounded up and jailed. And in all respects, at that particular time in Germany, National Socialism was dead. But with the world press watching and listening carefully, Hitler proclaimed that I am not a traitor, and there is no such thing as high treason against the traitors of 1918, meaning the people who had paid the reparations. The beer hall putsch, the rebellion, although a fiasco, made Hitler in the eyes of many a hero and a patriot. So while he served a short prison term, he dictated to Rudolf Hess, who was later to be the second man in the Nazi Party, what became to be known as the Bible of National Socialism, Mein Kampf, which is interpreted as being my struggle. The book contained an outline of the future of Germany, specifically, as he saw it, and most of all, it contained a point of view. And this is the first time where we see the idea of an absolute leader, and the first time that we see the kernel of the master race being brought forth in print. He simply put down in the book what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. And the saddest thing of all, the world at large did not pay much attention under any circumstances. There were a series of events in 23 to 33 with absolute force, playing the communists against the social democrats, getting on the proper side of the leading industrialists, using stronger brown shirt organizations, the startup of the SS troops, the secret police and regular police, by brutality and using shabby and shoddy deals with the old-time aristocrats. Hitler became chancellor by election in 1933 in January. Notice the pattern. He consolidated his power within Germany. He banned all communist meetings. He shut down the communist press. He banned the social democratic rallies were forbidden. The Freemasons were began to be persecuted. The Catholic Center Party was persecuted. None of them were exempt. And just prior to that election, 51 anti-Nazis were killed and hundreds were wounded. The SA was in control, and then later the SA took over from that. And that was in control of the police, the regular police. Goering, Goebbels, Hess, Rowan, Strasser, all of them were involved in some kind of the consolidation of power. Now, in March of 33, the first concentration camp was established at Dachau. And a new look at Jewish propaganda was again reviewed, and a new effort to establish within Germany a master race. Along about this time, you begin to see the decrees, the government by decrees, where Jews were forced to wear the yellow stars on their suits and on their dresses, where they were forced to scrub streets with brushes, when they were tagged with, I am a Jew, and if a German associated with them, they were called Jew lovers, and they began to suffer that kind of prosecution and persecution. Hitler Youth were recruited, the 10 to 15-year-olds in the age group of 16 to 18. Book burning became a very regular thing. Purges took place. The first leader of the SA was eliminated because of a rivalry with Himmler, who became the leader of the SS. Hundreds of brown shirts loyal to Rowan were killed, along with others who opposed the new regime. Scores of camps sprung up. And at first they were very crude and were called wild camps because there was very little control by anybody but the SA. And into those camps trudged thousands and thousands of people. And as I mentioned, under decree, the SA, the SS, and the regular police were allowed to arrest any person considered to be an enemy of the state, and they could be held without warrant. And later, as the SS took control, the camps became models of German efficiency. Segregation and humiliation became the rule. However, in 33 and 34 and 35, being in the camp was not totally a dead end. During the early 30s, the population was kept about 25,000. That's not very many folks. but it was kept that way by releases and deaths. And when the Nazis took over Austria and Czechoslovakia, 75,000 undesirables were brought into the camps. And after they attacked on Poland in 1939, a huge influx, not war prisoners, no, I'm not talking about war prisoners, a huge influx of prisoners were in the camps. In October alone of 1941, 15,160 German people were arrested in prison. However, this figure was totally eclipsed by the new program of all who were Jews and all who were undesirables were in fact with foresight to be eliminated. And the final solution had begun. Hitler, Hess later fled to England to try to negotiate a separate treaty. Strausser, who was later eliminated, Rosenberg, Heydrich, and much later Adolf Eichmann were all responsible for the final solution. All were involved. And if one takes the time to read a little bit about those people that were close to Hitler, like Goebbels and Himmler and Goering and others, all viewed early and accepted anti-Semitism as a way of life. This caused them to more readily to accept the philosophy of Mein Kampf. Himmler had a degree in agriculture, and the only thing he'd ever done with it is to do a research project on manure on certain plants. Goering was a World War I fighter pilot who had taken over the Red Bering Squadron. Goebbels was a PhD in English literature and a non-successful writer. But it appears that they all had the personalities, along with Hitler, to be the have-nots and to embrace National Socialism with all its evils. And they looked for scapegoats, and they found them in gypsies and Jews and other folks that didn't meet their criteria for the superhuman pure race. Now, I want to give you some background on a couple of these people. Goebbels stood by Hitler more or longer than any other person. He killed his own wife and children in the bunker in Berlin when they were being attacked by the Russians in the last days. You know, of course, Hitler committed suicide. And remember that I had said earlier that Hess had escaped to England and was imprisoned. I think he was the last person that was held in the prison in Germany. Remember also that Goering was declared guilty at the Nuremberg war trials, and at the end, Admiral Donitz was put in charge of the German government to serve as the new leader and make a treaty with the Allies. And Hitler fled to the north when the bunker was being attacked to meet with this admiral and was not able to establish a second-in-command relationship, was picked up by the British. He was captured by the British in reality, and as he was giving a physical, he bit into a cyanide pill and died instantly. Of the 22 major defendants at the Nuremberg trials, 3 were acquitted, 8 received long prison terms, the rest were sentenced to death, and Goering was the most loyal of all the Germans during the trials. He took charge in the lunchrooms, he took charge in the docket, he was defiant to the end, and in fact, if any fellow defendant weakened or protested, he would bully them into silence. And during one lunch break, it's documented, he made this statement. He said it made him sick to see Germans selling their souls, stating, "Damn it, I wish we could all have the courage to confine our defense to 3 simple words: lick my ass." And this, on October 15th, 1946, he defeated the hangman by also getting a cyanide pill and taking it, just 2 hours before he was to be hung. Now, folks, I've passed over so much in attempting to prepare you for my own personal experience. The German and Russian treaty, where they took Poland to task, and the compromises that were made, the treachery and the conquest of country after country, the deals and the double deals, the Reichstag fire, the racial selection techniques, the resistance of some good men who were in the regime, and all those who were outside the regime, many Catholic priests. Erich Bonhoeffer, a Protestant minister, was put to death just a few short months before the end, and he stood out for 3 or 4 years, held out against those people. You know, of course, that they were killing people in the camps till the very end. It didn't happen. It happened on the day, in some instances, that Allies had liberated the camps. I want to mention something to you now before I get to the Woebling experience. It's called Kristallnacht, and Kristall Night is what it really refers to. on November 9th in 1938, a young Jewish boy in Paris shot a third embassy secretary, German embassy secretary in Paris, and killed him. And this gave an excuse to the multitudes of people who then attacked German shops or Jewish shops in Germany. They smashed windows all over Germany. The terror was coming to a head on the 9th and 10th. There were 7,500 Jewish shops destroyed. There were hundreds of homes destroyed. 191 synagogues were put to the torch. 36 Jews were killed outright, and the injury figure was much higher. There was a writer for the New York Times who cabled the New York Times saying that he had just witnessed a wave of destruction in Germany that had not happened in Germany since the 30 Years' War. Every town and every city sustained destruction under the watchful eyes of police, and thousands of Jews were arrested for their own protection. Now, headlines tend to focus on major camps like Buchenwald and Dachau, and as the war came to an end, every day French and British and American soldiers and Russian soldiers were liberating in the camps in some manner or form. The careful planning of the SS had made the camps an economic force in Hitler Germany. They had a card that established exactly what each Jew was worth when they worked 9 months, what the teeth would be worth, what the hair would be worth, what their labor was worth up to that time, and they had that down in black and white. And they had that card to use as guidelines inside the camps. So the Jews and the Gypsies, slated for extinction, made money for the SS overseers. And they made money for the industrialists of Germany at that time. Each major camp was a center of subcamps and subcamps and subcamps. The Dachau administration alone, and Dachau is located somewhere near Munich, fairly close to Munich, was controlled and supplied prisoners for a total of 240 auxiliary camps. But what those soldiers saw was no less important to them than the experience that I am now about to embark upon with you. I keep these only to remind, as I grow older, my memory dims about some of these events. As a matter of fact, just until the last 2 weeks, I haven't wanted to think about it very much at all. I hope that you'll take an opportunity to look at some of these books and these pictures. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division, and we were at the Elbe River. And we were about to cross, and the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment crossed over that river by boats, and then they put some pontoons down, and my regiment crossed. And again, keep in mind that I was in an INR platoon, and therefore the main body of the regiment normally was behind me, but not always, or behind us in the platoon. We crossed the Elbe River, and there are two things I want to relate to you. That immediately crossing the river and on the way to the town of Ludwigslust, but being a PFC, I didn't know, frankly, where in the hell we were going. I was just doing what I was told to be doing. But at any rate, as we crossed the river, we ran into one town, a very small village, and there were German soldiers lying about, some dead, some half alive, and some might have been shot by escaped concentration members. I don't know that to be a fact, but some might have been hit by artillery that had come in. We had a terrific artillery bombardment against when we were crossing, and so and I suppose our own artillery fired back. But I know we were in the town, and we heard some firing in another sector, but not in that town, probably about a half a mile away. And so our lieutenant looked at his map, and he was kind of noted for this, but he looked at the map, he said, "We're in the wrong place, we should be over there." And so we got in the Jeep and went over there. And that Jeep was a division recon Jeep, was supposed to be out in front of us. Obviously it wasn't. They were supposed to be where we were. That Jeep was completely knocked out. The GIs were on the ground. And so we went up a little road and captured, at that particular time, they had brought into service many middle-aged soldiers called Volkssturm. And they were in kind of lightish green uniforms. And they had fired a Panzerfaust, like a bazooka, at that Jeep and knocked it out and killed the people in it. So we captured a few of those people and put them in kind of a pen and kind of a cage that they had for prisoners that they were holding, and locked the gate and left and had to go back to that town. And then we went into the next town, and it's kind of an interesting experience. When I received the Eisenhower Liberation Award, Of course, my Major General, and generals don't associate with PFCs, I'll guarantee you, but he was in this town with us, and we drove up to this side street, and a German motorcyclist, a scout, I assume, drove down the street, and I was in the machine gun seat of that thing, and so I started to fire away at him, and my general drove up in his Jeep and stood up with his Tommy gun and fired at him, and of course he was in my line of fire, and luckily I didn't pull the trigger, but that happened. So when we were back east, I mentioned that to him, and he remembered that incident, but of course he didn't know how close he came to not being a general any longer. That happened, and we captured that fellow, and then we captured some more. We chased. It was like cops and robbers to a certain extent. And we had not known about the camps yet. We'd only heard vague rumors, but not about this area. We went out of that town, and we came up to the hillsides and captured some more troops and put them on the road back, because we didn't have time. There were other troops behind us. We came over the brow of the hill, looked down a long road, probably 6 miles in length, paved road, nice highway, and we saw German troops by the thousands coming towards us. And we were mighty scared because we only knew of one unit ahead of us, and that was another division recon jeep. And we saw the Tiger tanks 100 yards on each side and 200 yards tracking us with their 88s. We saw some well-disciplined regiments coming towards us, still had their arms. But we went on down that road because we knew that the war was about to come to an end. And we went down that road until we came to the city of Ludwigslust, a town of about 15,000 people. Very much like Coeur d'Alene. Well-kept homes, not very many wooden homes, well-kept homes, clean streets, cobblestone streets and paved streets, well-fed looking people, not very shabby clothing as we were able to observe. In our ignorance as soldiers, like you always do when you're young and full of frivolity, I guess, we were told to get some quarters for that particular night, and so we chased some German people out of their house up in a kind of an apartment on the main street downtown. My platoon did, or 3 or 4 of us in that, 5 of us in that platoon, I guess, at that particular time. Some others were in another building. So I'm sorry to say we, as I look back now, was stupid, but we, of course, broke all their dishes in their house. We stomped on their beds with our muddy feet and their clean sheets. We kicked them down the stairs, what it amounted to. And not very much sad about it because we'd had a lot of misery, but not yet knowing about the camps. So then when we were up there drinking a little wine and having a little relaxation period as things go with GIs and whatever we could find to drink, we were told to get back downstairs and down on the street and start directing traffic. We began to direct the traffic. The soldiers, the German soldiers that were surrendering, thousands. Now remember, the 21st Army Group was surrendering to the whole. Only a division, an airborne division, only had about 8,000 people in it. We had 150 people surrender, 1,000 people surrendering to us. We had to control that traffic. So we were controlling traffic. We were directing traffic. That's what my platoon was doing. And then somebody said, get in the Jeep. Lozier wants you, and that's that lieutenant right there, wants you to go out to a camp, one of those camps. Nobody knew what one of those camps meant. So we got in the Jeep. Lozier was in another Jeep, and 3 or 4 of us in my Jeep. And we went out to the camp, and we went about 4 miles from Ludwigslust, and as we came down this paved road again, outside of this kind of nice little town, we began to smell. We began to get an odor of something, and I don't know how you smell death, but it was there. And we looked to our left on the road out of the Jeep, and we saw the temporary barracks, and we saw the barbed wire. They were low silhouette barracks. And there was trash, and we saw some people in striped outfits hanging on the wires. As we were driving along the side of the barracks, still on the road, we turned into the gate, and I think the gate had some permanency to it. I'm not positive as I remember now. We went into the gate, into the camp, and there we were in a camp not very large, not much larger than this campus. As a matter of fact, probably extending from this building over to the science building and over to the vocational building. That was about the size of the camp. There were probably 3,000 people left alive, and 1,000 were dead or in the process of dying at that very instant. And they were all on the ground and in the dirt and the excrement. The feces was all over the ground. There was vomit. There were people on their hands and knees, and they were looking up at us and begging us to feed them. We had no food, of course. And we drove to the one end of the camp because we were following this lieutenant, and we stopped at a barracks at one end and went into the barracks. And in the barracks, again, you have to keep in mind, it's a fairly narrow barracks, probably 200 people in the barracks. On each side of the barracks there was the shelving, about 6 shelves to a side, and each shelf contained either a person alive or dead. And we went along each side and touched those people and tried to pull them out, and the lieutenant said, "Don't bother with that." There were some on the floor, as you'll see there in that picture, and there were some sitting up, some lying down, some were, as I said, in the process of dying within that particular barracks. Most of them weighed, I would assume, about 60 pounds or 70 pounds, adult men. There were no women in that camp. The women were located in another camp, and they were not as badly treated as this particular camp. Remember that this was a transitory camp, one in which they gathered people together to send them to the extermination camps. We went through that barracks, and because of the stench, we had to get out. We were able to put some people on the floor, as I remember correctly, and get them kind of set up in preparation for we knew that the medics would be coming. We went to a couple of other barracks. The same process was taking place. Some had Jewish stars on. Some did not have Jewish stars on their uniforms. We went to another area of the camp. We were told to take a look and see if there were any gas chambers. There were no gas chambers. We looked at their kitchens. We looked at some work areas. We came back to that first barracks, got back in the Jeep, and the lieutenant said, I must stay here, you people. As he said this, you people go back to town and continue what you were doing. Or our platoon leader said that. I don't recollect which said it, but somebody said it. So we started out. And as we started out, the first Red Cross or the first aid people came into the camp. The 325, I think they were 325 aid people with a Jeep, and they saw the Red Cross on there. And the prisoners began to run and crawl towards that camp. And behind that came 2 ambulances with Red Crosses on them. They knew what that meant. And the people crawled towards those ambulances and towards those Jeeps. It was shortly at that time that we pulled out and went back downtown. Now, back east, when I was back there last year, we had some people who came to the speaking platform after we went through the award ceremony and that were in the camp and wanted us to talk to them and sign some things. And I had some children of those people come back to me to talk to me. One of them said something very interesting. I was in your camp, and thank God for you. And I said, look, I accept the award on behalf of all the troopers of the 82nd. It's nothing. It's nothing. He said, yes, it was. He said, I was lucky. Did not eat the food that they brought us at the beginning because many people died immediately upon eating that food because their stomachs were not capable of dealing with it, and it just tore them asunder. And then another fellow came back and he said, I was lucky also, Ray Stone. I was on the train that they were getting ready to ship about 3,000 of us out to another camp, and an American P-51 came down and knocked the engine out, so we were on the side street there, on the side. We didn't have to move. They couldn't move. And so there was some starving there. Now, that's the start of the camp. Now, let me tell you about the feelings. I've got to get this to you, how this sort of affected all of us. The general did a great thing. He took 200 of those dead people, and he had them buried in the town square in front of the castle, in front of this sort of, I suppose, like a county courthouse type thing. And everybody in that city had to march by that was 12 years of age and over. And that meant about 11,000 people marched by those 200 graves. Remember, there were another 800 that they buried out at the camp. And there were still about 3,000 living, and some of those, probably another 1,000 of those died. So that was that situation, and he made them do that. The mayor of the town had committed suicide. He and his wife had both committed suicide. We had no inclination of what was taking place. But that was the camp itself. But the saddest thing of all, and the camp was plenty, and more than most of us could deal with, the saddest thing of all was the reaction of the people. It's like when you discipline a kid and you say, "Why did you do this?" And he says, "I'm sorry," expecting to give you that be the reason and the excuse for the behavior. The people did not accept any responsibility for what was taking place. We went to another part of the town and we recorded in another place. And by the way, there's a picture in there of a kid by the name of Paul. He hung around our platoon a little bit, and there was another kid who hung around our platoon. We kind of adopted him for 2 or 3 days, and then we had to let him go to a DP camp, a displaced person camp, which they all put them all sooner or later. But we moved to this other part of town, and we recorded in some houses, and the German people were no longer there, but there was some right across the street, and across a kind of a cement, or rather a brick wall. And in my platoon, everybody except a couple of folks like me, who were kind of hillbillies, could speak a foreign language. We had people that could speak French, Polish, and German, and Italian in our platoon, because we were that kind of platoon, an intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. So I took Larson with me, who could speak German, at least college German, and we went across this lady's house, because she looked awfully comfortable standing out on her front porch. And he asked her and questioned her carefully about the camp, as any GI would do. He was a PFC like I was. Probably had no business being there. Went down into her cellar, and it was well stocked with canned meats and foods and vegetables. And she had not lost any weight, I'll guarantee you. And so we came back upstairs, and madder than heck about it, went out on her front porch, and she had a new bicycle out there. And in my ignorant frustration, I took her bicycle apart, piece by piece, took it across the fence and threw it back at her. And my captain of my company saw me do that. He made me get it back and put it back together and put it on her porch. I said, "Why do I have to do that?" He said, and we had a little bit of, but you don't argue with a captain even when you're PFC, so. I put it back. And I don't mean this to be humorous necessarily, but I guarantee you I went back that night and tore it up again when he wasn't watching. But that was the whole attitude. That's what upset me more than anything else. That town did not accept responsibility for their actions. And I'm fearful, and I'm terribly fearful, this is happening again. Did you hear or read the news the last 3 days? The Nazi Party in Germany, under an a former SS trooper, is making some inroads again. Not enough, probably for major worries, you see. But at one time, they said not enough for major worries regarding Hitler. But watch the news in the next few days. They had recent elections there, and the party that was in power was very complacent. Well, they put these folks in displaced persons camps, and of course we were angry and we were sad, and I have blocked out much of the years and have dimmed a lot of the things, and I don't know, folks, how one reacts now to this other than with sadness and hoping that in time, and I'm going back east fairly soon again to speak to a Jewish community in the Quad Cities, to be their speaker for memorial of Kristallnacht, the thing I mentioned to you previously. I ask you to intently listen to what I have to say. Let me read you something, and maybe it will be meaningful to you, and then I'll have a final statement. Let me go back to Invictus again, just for a moment, meaning the Latin title Unconquered. William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not cried nor winced aloud. Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloody, but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll, I am the master of my fate, and I am the captain of my soul. But more than this, ladies and gentlemen, let me read you a short passage from the book, the General Confession book of the Common Prayer. We have left undone those things we ought to have done, and we have done those things which we ought not to have done. And this morning, I'm simply asking you not to leave things undone. I'm simply asking you as your guest speaker, just for a moment. I don't desire any applause for this kind of speech, but I would be very appreciative if you would take your neighbor's hands. Right now, grasp your neighbor's hand, whoever you're sitting by, front or back, and grasp onto them tightly and raise them above your head and give yourself a vow that it will not happen in Kootenai County or in Coeur d'Alene, in the state of Idaho, in the state of our nation, in our republic, that form of government that we love so dearly. Vow it, please, to yourself. Thank you very much. Anyone desires to look at the books, come on down and I have the reading list. The reading lists are available to you. I brought them for you.